First order of business is roll call.
Good morning. Priya Mathur.
Good morning.
Rob Fechner.
Good morning.
Margaret Brown. Good morning. Steve Roras for John Chung. Here. Richard Costigan. Here. Richard Gillihan. Here. Dana Hollinger. Here. Henry Jones.
Here.
David Miller.
Here.
Ramon Rubalcaba.
Here.
Bill Slayton. Here. Teresa Taylor. Here. And Karen Green Ross for Betty Yee.
We have a full complement. The next order of business is approval of the June 20th, 2018 Board of Administration timed agenda. I would like to, we do need to modify the agenda to bring agenda item 9 before agenda item 12. So if someone would make a motion to adopt the agenda with the timed agenda with that change. Thank you. Mr. Jones made the motion and Ms. Taylor seconded. Any discussion on the motion? I'm sorry? Did I miss something? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 3 is the Pledge of Allegiance. And oh, I'm sorry.
I think the motion may have been misstated. I think the motion should have been agenda item 12 before.
What did I say?
Agenda item 9 before 12.
Oh, you're right. I did mix it up. Sorry. It should have been agenda item 12 before 9. That was the intent of the maker of the motion and the entire board. Thank you very much for that correction. Agenda item number 3, Pledge of Allegiance. For that, I've asked Henry Jones to lead us in the pledge.
Okay. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, that brings us to the Board President's report. Welcome to our final meeting of the fiscal year. Let's hope that the markets remain stable over the course of the next few weeks so that we can deliver strong investment returns for our members and employers. This has been an important week with the Pension Health Benefits Committee approving and asking the board to approve a new 2019 reference pricing pilot for 3 therapeutic drug classes. And this continues CalPERS' efforts to drive value for our members, reducing costs while delivering high-value care. The Pension Health Benefits Committee also recommends to the board, and that will be coming before the board in just a few moments, that the board adopt 2019 health care rates for our HMO, PPO, and association plans. And while overall these rates are low, we recognize that 2 plans are also seeing more significant increases. In making our decisions, the committee and the board must consider many factors: cost, quality, and access, and also many populations, actives and retirees, state, local governments, and school districts, participants in different HMO and PPO plans, to arrive at a decision that we believe strikes the right balance and delivers the greatest aggregate value. I want to take this opportunity also to preview some of the topics that we'll be covering at our offsite in July. As a reminder, we will meet July 16th to the 18th at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Concord, California. We will spend our first day together on the topic of investments, specifically investment technology and sustainable investments. If you had an opportunity to listen to our investment committee discussion on Monday, you heard Dr. Ashby Monk from Stanford tell our board that the way we invest today will be completely different in 10 to 15 years due to technology. So it's appropriate that our first topic at the July offsite will focus on how advances in technology have the potential to disrupt and impact investments that we are making, and also the way we make them. We will spend the remainder of our day focused on our sustainable development goals, including a presentation from our new Managing Investment Director, Beth Richtman, on our investment team's vision for our Sustainable Investment Program. The second day of our offsite will be dedicated to healthcare and enterprise management tools. We will cover a number of health topics, including the changing landscape around high-deductible health plans, the challenge of managing opioids, an analysis from our health team on our current public agency regions that we use in setting health rates, and strategies to better prevent and treat mental illness among our members. We will also hear from members of our CalPERS team on how we are using the Lean Six Sigma principles and cost-effectiveness management to improve efficiencies across the organization. Our final day of the offsite will be focused on the governance of our own board and our quest for board diversity in corporate America. I encourage all of our stakeholders to attend if you can. We will be taping some of the sessions for later viewing on our website. I want to close my report with a really inspiring story about the role and influence CalPERS plays in our world. In early June, CalPERS had the privilege and honor to be invited to a meeting at the Vatican with Pope Francis, and I believe we have a picture of the event. You can see our very own Ann Simpson there in pink. The Pope was meeting with oil company executives from around the globe to discuss how these leaders can help address climate change. It's not every day that an organization gets invited to a meeting of this caliber. I believe it's the commitment and dedication of this board and our investment team in the area of sustainable investments that gave us a seat at this table. Ann Simpson represented us at the meeting as pictured here, and I'll note that she's one of the only a few women in the room. Now that concludes my report, and I'll turn it over to our CEO, Marcy Frost, for her report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and good morning, President Mather and members of the board. It's been a really busy month since we last met, so I plan on giving you some highlights of activities. It's also been a big month for healthcare, as President Mather had indicated in her report. So I am going to start off with talking a little bit about health rates. Yesterday, the Pension and Health Benefits Committee was presented with the health premiums for 2019 that was negotiated on behalf of our 1.4 million members, as well as for our employers. As the committee saw, we have had another challenging year in negotiations, and the team has worked diligently, I believe, to get the best rates possible with working with our health plans. And something I think that the team should feel really good about, again, that these rates came in at the level that they came in. I think it's important to note that as healthcare rates are rising around the United States and for many across, again, the country, our members will see an overall increase of less than 1%. In fact, only 3 of the plans will see an increase. Most members who are part of the health program here will see a slight decrease or no decrease or no increase at all. These final premium rates represent the combined efforts of several of the teams in health, in our actuarial services department, and our legal offices, who've worked really hard to improve upon the preliminary rates that were presented to you last month. I'm really proud of the work that they've done, and I know that you share in that as well. With your approval later this morning of the 2019 premiums, we'll begin preparing our members for open enrollment. Open enrollment runs from September 10th through October 5th. And as Leanna Bailey-Crimmins indicated yesterday, something that the team is quite proud of is that we'll have an open enrollment app available to our members this year. And then, of course, because this has become a year-round process for the team, we'll start the next round of healthcare negotiations for 2020, again, because this is certainly a year-round effort. Included in the healthcare changes for next year is the pharmaceutical reference pricing proposals that you heard about in Pension and Health Benefits yesterday. The proposal to pilot this plan builds on our role as a healthcare leader in reference pricing. And again, the primary goal here is to increase transparency around medication costs to help make members more aware of the cost of the medications that they're taking and to give them a more active role in choosing the appropriate medication suited to their own budgets. Turning now briefly to investments, and I will close my report with investment performance. But in Monday's investment committee, we discussed the private equity models that are now under consideration by this board. After nearly a year of looking at the models, we have landed on what we're calling the 4 pillars. They include, in Pillar 1, an increased allocation to our emerging manager program. Pillar 2, which would be to possibly work with a strategic partner for co-investments. And then Pillars 3 and 4, which we're calling CalPERS direct models to support longer-term investment needs. You've asked several questions, and those questions have since been put into a checklist. So as we are bringing back information to this board and addressing those questions, you can check those off of the list that we provided to you. And we will also refine this proposal as additional information comes in, with a go, no-go decision expected for later this fall. As we continue to discuss the plan, I think it's also important that everyone in the auditorium, as well as all of our members and our employers, again, understand why we're considering these models. And the number one reason, of course, is the combination of the numbers where we pay very close attention. That is the assumed rate of return being reduced to 7, as well as the current funded status of the plans, which is around 71%. What we hear from our members, I say this frequently, out interacting with members, their number one concern is the safety of their benefit. When they see the funded status at less than 80, 90%, it does cause them some concern about the viability of their benefit when they need it. We also want to make sure that we're building an investment portfolio that drives the best possible returns over the long term. Moving on, next month, we will also announce the fiscal year and investment returns for 2017 and 18. As you know, our annual rate of return has a significant impact on employer contributions and our overall funded status. The higher the return, the more pressure it takes off of our employers' budgets. To date, we continue to be above our 7% return target, but we'll just have to wait and see over the next couple of weeks what the markets will bring. And again, I'll end my report with actual investment performance. Over the last 2 years, we've been working hard to improve the funded status and get the fund on a solid path to long-term sustainability. As we strengthen the fund for the long-term benefit of our members who are serving California, we're also mindful of the role our investments play in helping California to succeed. Those investment strategies are detailed in both the CalPERS for California report and the CalPERS California Initiative 2017. You saw those reports again on Monday in the Investment Committee. As of June 30th of 2017, we have invested more than $30 billion in California-based companies and projects, which is a 10% increase over last year. In addition to the revenue, CalPERS investments also provide ancillary support for residents in many communities around the state. For example, investments in private equity and infrastructure and real estate supported the creation of over 266,000 jobs. And as also shown in the California Initiative 2017 report, CalPERS private equity investments in traditional underserved markets since 2001 have helped provide support for more than 176,000 workers, generated high-quality jobs with employee benefits that surpass state and national levels, enhanced job opportunities for economically disadvantaged persons in low to moderate income communities, and created opportunities for women and minority managers, which again exceeds the national benchmark. And I've said this many times, this is a very complex organization with a lot of activity happening, but it's particularly gratifying to know that we have an important role to play in the success of this state. So another item that I've been spending quite a bit of time on in the last weeks are more outreach opportunities with our employers and our members. It's really important that not only I, but the rest of you are out talking about the significant decisions that have been made, as well as the accomplishments that we've had over this last year, and to share the story with the members and the stakeholders who have a very keen interest in us being successful. So the Solid Foundation for the Future report, we did create a PowerPoint template where the board can also use that as you're out talking with stakeholder groups, member groups, employer groups, the legislature, what have you. I've been out doing that as well. It's also a great opportunity, what I call doing a bit of myth busting about the facts of the system. And if we're not out telling the story, sometimes the facts get filled in a non-factual way. Again, a lot of people interested in that report. And since we last met, I've spoken with members of the California State Association of Counties, the California Special Districts Association, and I think their members expressed strong appreciation for the work that CalPERS has been doing to strengthen the fund. I also had some good discussions recently with the editorial boards for the Los Angeles Times and Comstock's magazine, a local business magazine here in Sacramento. We talked about many of the challenges that we face and the pressure of public agencies. And I hope to do more of that kind of media outreach in the near future. And for board members who would like to go along, just let me know if that would be something you would be interested in doing along with me. I also think it's important to talk directly with members. Again, that's the reason we're here, is to serve the members of the system about the work we're doing. So last week, I was able to attend the CB, the Benefit Education event in Riverside. And I spoke to a couple hundred of attendees, and what was great is that there were a number of questions that had come in. And I think what it showed really is that there is a lot of confusion about what's happening here. And so over the next year, I'll be spending much more of my time talking directly with members. Next week, I'll be participating on a panel for the California League of Cities. They're expecting about 300 elected officials to be in attendance at their executive forum, and I look forward to helping them understand what we're doing to secure the retirement and health benefits for the employees of their cities. In addition to external outreach, there are a number of internal events coming up that are important to mention. The next week, the executive team is hosting a CalPERS Leadership Forum to share their stories of driving team engagement. And this is the second forum we've held this year with our managers and supervisors, and it's a follow-up to the employee engagement survey, where we received some feedback from the teams that they wanted more interaction, more of a relationship with the senior management team. And each of the executives have been working with their own programs to identify the one item that they want to work on to improve employee engagement results for their program. And so the executive team will be here with a number of our supervisors and managers sharing the one thing that they've worked on and their progress, whether that was a success or maybe it was something that they intended to be successful that ended up not being so, and they'll talk about that as well. The other item that we're working on internally to shore up our own team is a governance training that our executive team, and we've invited Ann Simpson to participate on that project as well. It's a project that will be led by Rick Funston, who specializes in risk intelligent organizations and governance practices. And the purpose of this training is to make sure we're working together as smoothly as possible in support of the board. The other item we want to do is review our own processes that are created to put agenda items before the various committees and the board and make sure that those are effective and that they are successful for all of you. So I've interviewed a couple of you already. I will continue those interviews to talk with you about the expectations you have regarding agenda items, level of detail, the content. Is it organized in the way that is of most value to you? You may know that we put together, or we prepare about 1,100 pages of material on a monthly basis. So is that 1,100 pages the appropriate level of detail for you? And should it be organized in a way that makes it simpler for you to get through? Because again, you're trying to get through this 1,100 pages in about a week. So next, I want to let you know that registration for our 19th annual educational forum has begun. This is our signature employer event, and so far we have nearly 300 employers registered to attend the forum in October at the Renaissance in Indian Wells. And this year, we're going to have a special set of sessions designed just for elected officials so they can, so they can discuss the key issues their cities, their counties, and districts are facing directly with CalPERS leaders. And more information about the educational forum is on our website. And the final item I want to mention is the success of a recent webinar our teams produced about the unfunded actuarial liability. There's a lot of confusion between what is the UAL as it relates to the normal cost of the plan and how do those factor into the employer contributions. So we had a record number of participants at 723 employers. That's quite large. And in addition, I understand that since the initial broadcast, the YouTube video of the webinar has been viewed over 200 times. So that's about a quarter of our public employers likely who are accessing this material. So that is a great turnout, and it says, again, a lot about how eager our employer partners are to explore funding solutions for the UAL. So I'd like to extend my thanks to our teams in the actuarial office and the stakeholder relations and public affairs for their work to produce such a successful webinar. So now on to investment performance year to date. As I mentioned, the total fiscal year to date performance is above 7. It's around 8.3. The rolling 1-year return of the fund is 10.2. The 3-year return is 6.4. The 5-year return is 7.7. The 10-year return is 5.1, and the 20-year return is 6.2. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for a very substantive report. Any comments, questions from the board? Okay, we will move on then to agenda item number 5, which is the approval of the, agenda item number 6, which is approval of the action consent items. That's the May meeting minutes and the board travel approvals. It's a pleasure of the board.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Fechner, seconded by Ms. Hollinger. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 8 is the committee reports and actions. First, I will call on the chair of the investment committee, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. The investment committee met on June 18, 2018. The committee approved agenda item 6A to approve the recommended strategic asset allocation for the healthcare fund reserve and the long-term care fund, and agenda item 7A to adopt a revised total fund policy. The committee received reports on the following topics: the first reading of the revision of the private equity program policy, CalPERS for California and California Initiative, update on private equity business model alternatives, and corporate board diversity update. The chair directed staff to bring back follow-up items at a future date. An item to explore further policy revisions from the disclosure of sexual harassment settlements to the topic of aggression of settlements. An item on corporate quarterly reporting and the perspective of a long-term investor, and the SASB's approach with respect to diversity. The committee heard public comments on the following topics: revision of the total fund policy, second reading, update private equity business model alternatives, and corporate board diversity update. At this time, I would like to share some highlights of what to expect at the August Investment Committee meeting. Revision of the private equity program policy, second reading, CalPERS trust level review and consultant report, Iran Sudan update, opportunistic strategies annual program review and consultant review, trust level portfolio management program review and consultant review, and the review of the survey results of the board investment consultants. The next meeting of the investment committee is scheduled for August 13, 2018 in Sacramento, California, and that concludes my report, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next, I'll call on Mr. Fechner for the Pension Health Benefits Committee meeting report.
Thank you, Madam President. The Pension Health Committee, PHBC, met on June 19, 2018. The committee recommends and I move the board approve the following. Agenda item 6, approve the final proposed regulation defining full-time employment, attachment 1, with Board of Administration approval. Team members will submit the final rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law for adoption.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Agenda item 7, approve the reference pricing pharmaceuticals by therapeutic class, reference pricing, program for basic health plans serviced by a vendor or vendors chosen by staff beginning plan year 2019.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? Motion passes.
Agenda item 8A, approve the proposed 2019 Health Maintenance Organization premium rates for Anthem Blue Cross, Blue Shield of California, HealthNet of California, Kaiser Permanente, Sharp Health Plan, United Healthcare, and Western Health Advantage, and the Medicare Advantage rates for Anthem Blue Cross, Kaiser Permanente, and United Healthcare as shown in attachment 2.
On motion by committee, Mr. Costigan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just note I'll be abstaining on this issue as I've done each year for the last 7 years.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Abstain.
Please note Mr. Jones' abstention and also Mr. Costigan's abstention. Motion passes.
Agenda item 8B, Approve the use of $35 to $50 million of excess reserves to buy down the proposed PERS Care Basic Plan premium for 2019.
On motion by committee, discussion on the motion. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. Were we also going to approve the PPO rates at the same time, or no? Is that a separate motion?
That'll be a separate motion.
I did want to talk a little bit about using the excess reserves. I know in talking with a lot of our constituents, they had thought we had $120 million in reserves, and they found out on very short notice that there's really a lot less. And so I know we discussed this yesterday. It was discussed yesterday at the committee that we do better communicating what the issues are earlier to our constituents so they know exactly what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Approve the proposed 2019 preferred provider organization rates for Anthem Exclusive Provider Organization, PERS Choice, PERS Select, and PERS Care, as shown in Attachment 3.
On motion by committee, discussion on the motion. Ms. Brown.
This is the one I really wanted to talk about, which is the this board back in December eliminated risk adjustment, which means that about 30,000 of our members who actually get their services through PERS Care are going to experience a 38% increase over the next 2 years, and it just doesn't seem right that we're telling our retirees, the people who have the most need for services, that their costs are going to go up that much. And I just think that I'd implore this board to take a look at how we can implement risk adjustment. It's being done by other agencies, and I think that we can do it. We can have a better shot at doing it correctly, and I'd hope we would do that in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Abstain.
Please note Ms. Brown's no, and also Mr. Jones and Mr. Miller's abstentions. Motion passes.
The committee received reports on the following topics. The committee accepted the 2019 Association Plans Rate, Attachment 4, and reviewed the state annuity and contribution formulas, Attachment 5. The chair directed staff to continue to research and implement ways of providing more transparency to our stakeholders on important decisions made by the PHBC, to provide an analysis regarding the increase in health plan contracts and how that impacts competition and CalPERS members. This time, I'd like to share some highlights of what to expect at the September PHBC meeting. The committee will review the PPO reserve policy and receive information on prescription drug utilization and cost trends, regional factors, and Optum Rx. The next meeting of the PHBC is scheduled for September 25th, 2018 in Sacramento, California. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fechner. We did not have a Finance Administration Committee meeting, so the next report is from our Chair of Performance, Comp, and Talent Management, Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam President. The Performance Compensation Talent Management Committee met on June 19th, 2018. Committee recommends and I move the board approve the following. This is on agenda item 6, revised salary ranges for the future Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer and 2018-19 incentive design for the Chief Executive Officer. For the Chief Investment Officer position, adopt a revised salary range of $424,500 to $707,500 and a revised incentive range of 0 to 150%. The committee also delegated the setting of an incentive target to the Chief Executive Officer.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Please note Ms. Brown, and I'm sorry, I thought I heard another one. Mr. Gillihan's no.
Okay. For the Chief Financial Officer position, adopt a revised salary range of $217,500 to $362,500 and retain the current incentive range of 0 to 40%.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Please note Ms. Brown and Mr. Gillihan's no votes. Motion passes.
The committee deferred discussion on the 2018-19 incentive plan for the Chief Executive Officer to August 2018. And on agenda item 7, 2018-19 incentive metric recommendations, the committee also deferred this item to the August 2018 meeting. Committee heard public comments on the following topics: considerations for setting salary and incentive ranges for the Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer positions. This time, I'd like to share some highlights of what to expect at the August Performance Compensation Talent Management Committee meeting, 2018-19 incentive metric recommendations and incentive plan of the Chief Executive Officer. The next meeting of the Performance Compensation Talent Management Committee is scheduled for August 14th, 2018 in Sacramento, California. That completes my report.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the report of the Risk and Audit Committee, and for that, I call on the chair, Ms. Hollinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, the Risk and Audit Committee met on June 20th, 2018. The committee recommends, and I move, the board approve the following. Agenda item 6A, approve the proposed 2018-2019 Enterprise Compliance Plan.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Agenda item 6B, approve the proposed amendments to the personal trading regulation for submission to the Office of Administrative Law.
On motion by the committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
Agenda item 7A, approve the proposed 2018-2019 Enterprise Risk Management Plan.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Agenda item 8A, approve the proposed Office of Audit Services Plan for fiscal year 2018-2019.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Agenda item 8B, approve the Board of Administration's Independent Financial Statement Auditor's Annual Service Plan for the audit of CalPERS financial statements as of and for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018.
On motion by committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
The committee received reports on the following topic: Enterprise Risk Management Framework Review. At this time, I would like to share some highlights of what to expect at the September Risk and Audit Committee meeting. External audit fees and the 2017-2018 Annual Compliance Report. The next meeting of the Risk and Audit Committee is scheduled for September 25th, 2018 in Sacramento, California.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hollinger. We did not have a governance committee this month, so we are going to move on to agenda item number 12, legislative update, state and federal.
Good morning, Madam President and members of the board. Brad Pacheco, CalPERS team. This morning, we'd like to start with a update on federal activities. And so on the phone, we have Mr. Dan Crowley with K&L Gates, our federal representative. In particular, we thought it would be good for Dan to give an overview on some guidance released in April by the Department of Labor that addresses fiduciary duty and shareholder rights as it relates to ESG investing. So with that, I'd like to turn the table over to Dan.
Thank you, Brad. Madam President, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you. Welcome to the auditorium.
Thank you very much. As Brad said, I've been asked to give an update on the DOL guidance on ESG issues, which I will do in just a minute, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to give the board a very quick update on our progress since our offsite discussion in January of 2017. You will recall that the directive of the board at that time was to work to position CalPERS in Washington, D.C. as an opinion leader on financial services and economic policy issues that will impact returns to the fund. And I'm pleased to say that over the last 18 months, we have worked very constructively with your team on D.C. engagement. We've had a series of CalPERS leaders come to D.C. for various stakeholder meetings, including Gretchen Ziegler, Don Ponce, Kelly Fox, Henry Jones, James Andrus, Dan Bienvenu, Matt Jacobs, and undoubtedly others I might be missing. And throughout that process, I have to say that Gretchen Ziegler has really done an outstanding job as sort of the hub on the wheel to coordinate all the available resources internally and externally And as a consequence, as of today, knock on wood, we're batting 1,000 in terms of the legislative items that we have either supported or opposed. Those that we have affirmatively supported have been enacted into law. Those that we have been actively opposing have not been, and I don't expect that they will be, because we will continue to engage in the blocking and tackling necessary to make that happen. I think the clearest example of the effectiveness we've seen over the last 18 months is contained in Marcy's May 17th letter to the House majority and minority leaders, both of whom are from California, with respect to S-2155, the Dodd-Frank reform bill. I think there's a very good example of how far we've come. CalPERS, I would say, is now positioned as credible and authoritative on these issues, and that will allow you to continue to be effective going into the election and beyond, regardless of the election outcome. And of course, we're monitoring developments on possible further legislation with respect to Dodd-Frank. We do expect there to be some between now and the end of the year, and we will keep you posted on that. Most recently, we submitted a letter to the Capital Markets Subcommittee with respect to capital formation issues, and so I'd be happy to take any questions. But let me turn quickly to the DOL guidance. You know, I think it's safe to say that CalPERS has been a leader on ESG for more than a decade for two reasons. One is, of course, you're investing your own assets, but probably more importantly for purposes of this discussion is that you have a very long-term time horizon, really thinking about generating returns in order to meet intergenerational types of obligations. And so we were very interested to see what the current DOL might do in terms of reiterating or contradicting the DOL guidance that was issued under President Obama. And the DOL did issue an updated field bulletin on April 23rd that now it's important to remember it's not directly binding on CalPERS because you as a state pension plan are not governed by ERISA, and therefore it's not technically binding. But the DOL guidance is nonetheless an important benchmark against which to measure evolving notions about ESG considerations as they relate to the plan's fiduciary duty to stakeholders. And now, despite the current administration's philosophical views on climate change and ESG issues in general, one might have assumed that they would have pulled back from the Obama administration, when in fact they did not. If anything, they reiterated several of the points made by the Obama DOL in 2015. In particular, DOL again acknowledged that there can be circumstances in which ESG issues present material business risks or opportunities that qualified investment professionals would treat as economic considerations under generally accepted investment theories. They did add some new language to the guidance, but nothing new in terms of substance. So, for example, DOL observed that ERISA fiduciaries may not sacrifice investment returns or assume greater investment risks as a means of promoting collateral social policy goals. Well, of course, we knew that, and we've known that ERISA fiduciaries must always put the economic interests of the plan first. So none of that is new, but it was added as a way to sort of put into context the previous guidance, while at the same time validating the approach that CalPERS has now taken for more than a year. And I add that the bulletin was also helpful on an unrelated or a separate point, which is that it validates CalPERS' reliance on the use of proxy advisory firms as a cost savings measure, and thereby inadvertently supports our position in opposition to legislation that would impose costly new regulations on proxy advisors. So I would say, as you consider these issues going forward, the amount that CalPERS spends on shareholder engagement, or for that matter, on ensuring that financial markets remain well regulated, should be commensurate with the expected economic benefit over an appropriate investment horizon. And of course, to reiterate, your investment horizon is very long term. Investment returns always have been and will remain paramount, but I think a fair reading of the DOL bulletin is that the Trump DOL has now reiterated that ESG issues can be legitimate considerations in that regard. And then just to mention, because I know it's an issue of importance to CalPERS, the EPA has proposed changing the regulations with respect to CAFE standards. And I know this is very important to Beth Rickman and others who are leading that effort. So Gretchen and I had a meeting in the White House 2 weeks ago with the top staff on those issues. And I think the takeaway from that meeting is that they are open to negotiation to preserve the current flexibility that California has to set higher standards. We are currently working with your team on EPA rulemaking with respect to cost-benefit analysis, and then we'll also be helping to provide comment on the revised CAFE standards, and we will be meeting with the Auto Alliance and others to coordinate efforts in that regard. So that's a very quick overview of what we've been doing on your behalf. I'm pleased to say that we've made significant progress, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We do have some questions. Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you for your report, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I just wanted you to kind of give us a little more detail on, you stated that it was an example of your effectiveness on S2155, the Dodd-Frank reform bill. As I understand it, quite a bit of that got reversed, so I'm not sure what our benefit was. So if you could go into that a little bit for me.
Sure, and I emphasize that the process is ongoing and will be ongoing probably for many years, addressing some of the unintended consequences of Dodd-Frank. It was a bill that was enacted in haste over a 14-month period from the time it was proposed by Treasury until it was enacted into law, and both Chairman Frank and Chairman Dodd acknowledged at the time and have repeated several times since that there's no way to cover that much ground and get it all right. And so we have been, knowing that there are going to be changes in Dodd-Frank, we have chosen to try to engage constructively in the process, both to advance things that we think will stimulate capital formation, create better investment returns, help generate the returns that we need to meet our fiduciary obligations to the stakeholders, but also to stop some of the bad proposals that are out there, a number of them sort of geared at curtailing the shareholder rights, particularly for institutional investors. And so, for example, we have consistently opposed efforts to reform the proxy advisor regime. While we support more competition in that space, we think that the proposal that's on the table, the Duffy bill, has it imposes a burdensome regulatory regime for other than the intended purpose. Let's just put it that way. We've also consistently opposed efforts to tie the SEC up in knots with cost-benefit analysis. We have opposed changes to the say-on-pay rules that we advocated so aggressively during consideration of Dodd-Frank. We have been consistently opposed to revisions to SEC Rule 14A8 that would increase the thresholds required for shareholder proposals. We have opposed efforts to roll back transparency for private equity funds, and we will continue to oppose those measures, while at the same time we have now identified specific, broadly bipartisan bills geared at facilitating capital formation, and we are on record as supporting those. At least 3 of those were in the bill that passed Congress, and there are 4 or 5 others that are currently being debated and that we expect will likely be picked up in bipartisan fashion and enacted before the end of the year, perhaps in an omnibus appropriations bill. But I emphasize that this is an ongoing process, and while I'm proud to say that we're batting 1,000 now, I really don't want to waste much time on victory laps. We can do that after the Congress adjourns.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I see no further requests. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Crowley, and I think we can let you go now.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dan. Madam President, I'll just continue with some activity on the state legislative side. I want to start with our sponsored bills and give you an update on the status. Assembly Bill 2196, which discontinues installment payments for service credit purchases into retirement, will be heard by the Senate Appropriations Committee next Monday. As we've mentioned to the board at the request of stakeholders, we did amend the bill to delay the implementation to January 1st, 2020, so they have time to prepare their membership for this change. And then Assembly Bill 2415, which adds a chief health director and a chief operating officer to the executive positions under this board's salary setting authority, will be heard in the Senate PERS committee next Monday. And then finally, Senate Bill 1022, which shortens a contracting agency's voluntary termination time frame. That's being heard this morning. There's an Assembly PERS committee that started at 9 a.m. this morning. I'm pleased to report that all three of these bills have received unanimous support so far, so we'll just keep you posted on our progress. I did want to mention a couple other bills that we're following that we've talked to you about before. Senate Bill 1413, that would establish a pension pre-funding trust here at CalPERS. We had some concerns around some language. I'm pleased to report that we have given some amendments that have been accepted by the author, and generally the language we provided is broader and it gives more flexibility for this board to decide around the investment strategy of that trust. So we're happy about that. And then just on the topic of divestment, because that continues to be a topic related to legislation. Senator Pan introduced Senate Bill 783. This was originally proposed to be a separate process for divestment legislation to be reviewed as a commission housed in the State Controller's Office. It has since been amended. It's now a pension divestment review program housed in the UC system, and we're monitoring that. It would be a process where divestment legislation identified would be sent over to the UC system to do some analysis. The one thing that we have added with the committee consultant is some fiduciary language to ensure that any analysis or decisions made through this program do not, or I should say the board's final authority around the legislation is taken not before this program. Two other bills that we're following, I just heard from my colleague who's over at the Assembly PERS Committee that Senate Bill 459, sponsored by the State Treasurer, related to weapons, has been pulled. And then Assembly Bill 1597, which requires CalPERS and CalSTRS to divest from any investment vehicle controlled or issued by the Turkish government. That's scheduled to be heard in the Senate PERS Committee next Monday. Marcy and the investment team have met with the Assemblyman Nazarian on a number of occasions. We've expressed some engagement that we can do related to some of his concerns, but this bill continues to move forward. So I'll stop there before the other items that we have related to action and see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Green-Ross.
Yes, I just wanted to let the board know that the Controller's Office didn't know about this bill when it was introduced, and we sent a letter of opposition. I also think that the board might want to take a position on the bill because there were other issues. Even though the author intended that the functions within the Controller's Office would be ministerial, and they did amend us out and put the program over at UC, that there are other issues that this board might want to address and take a position against this bill, because it seems to be taking away your authority as board members to decide, and the investment staff to help determine what are the right investments for this fund. So I don't know that you want another entity to do that and take that away from you. So just would love to, if you need a motion to request, I don't know what the process is. Are you taking a position on this bill or asking the board to take a position on it?
So I should note that it is being heard this morning at the Assembly PERS Committee. I don't know the outcome as I sit here. We have not provided a recommendation for the board, but certainly that would be up to the board if they decided to take a position.
And this is with respect to Senate Bill 783.
783, introduced by Senator Pan, and it creates the separate process to review divestment legislation that's introduced within the legislature.
So what is the timing? Would we have to act today in support or opposition in order to make an impact? Or?
I think that there would be some more time available. We could always, if we had to, bring it to you in July at the offsite. So
okay. I think it might be better to have a full staff analysis before taking a decision. But anything else, Ms. Green?
I would make the motion. The controller has actually put in a letter of opposition.
Okay. Motion made by Green-Ross, seconded by Miller, to oppose Senate Bill 783. On the motion, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I was just going to say I would second, because any bill that usurps our authority to make decisions, I think we should oppose. So to me, it's an easy decision.
Marcy, did you?
Yes, we do have a little bit of time with this bill to come back with additional staff analysis. We have spoken with Senator Pan about our concerns. They have been open to our amendments about protecting the fiduciary duty of this board as it relates to the language in the bill itself. So we think that there are currently some protections in there that are being considered. Again, the bill is not in final form yet. It would be my recommendation to wait until July to have the board take an official position on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam President. I agree. I think we should wait. While currently as presented, we obviously have objections, but I think it would either be appropriate to say opposed unless amended, or just wait until July and let's have a fuller discussion on it so we can make an informed decision. I'm hesitant to try to make a decision today to send an opposed message when we're still in negotiation process.
Is that a substitute motion?
I'd make that as a substitute motion to wait till July.
Okay, motion made by Slayton, seconded by Ms. Taylor. On the motion, Mr. Costigan.
Thank you, Madam President. So the concern I have is I think you should deal from a position of strength. Waiting till July, the legislature is not in session. This bill is in Assembly Policy Committee. It'll pass out of its fiscal house, our fiscal policy committee, by the end of the month, and then it'll be on third reading in August when we return. Taking a position in July when they're on summer recess puts this bill on third reading on the floor, which is not enough time to go back and correct the bill. I'm just saying, and I'm speaking to the motion, if you're looking to make amendments, it is better to get the author's attention with an opposed position. I think Mr. Jones accurately pointed out what the concerns would be, and I do believe the Controller's Office has done the same thing. I will vote against the motion and urge our other board members to vote against Mr. Slayton's motion and take a position on the bill.
Thank you.
President Mather, we may have a notice issue. General Counsel will speak to that.
Please.
Yes, I mean, that kind of states that we have identified 3 bills on which we were going to take action. This is not one of them. The mere fact that it was mentioned in an agenda item probably doesn't give us doesn't constitute proper notice. So that's an issue.
Okay, then I will ask well, we have a substitute motion on, so does that mean, what procedurally should we do?
Well, as I understand the substitute motion, it's to essentially have this brought forward in July for the board to take a position on it then, which is a fine motion.
That would be fine. Okay. Thank you for that information. That's helpful. Ms. Taylor.
So I was just going to echo Mr. Slayton in that I think we don't have enough information. We're not sure, and whether or not our authority is going to be taken away, and amendments are still being talked about with our staff and the maker of the bill. So I think it's important that we go ahead and just kind of put this off until July.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. A little process, I guess, question that I have is that every month we receive all these bills that we've taken previous positions on. So you're saying that all these bills, we can't change our position on them until it's up for action?
I don't believe all these bills are bills we've taken a position on.
I mean, it says what our position is on a number of them. And some of them say not applicable, but many of them do say what our position was.
It is a status report on legislation, but you've taken positions on those because we've brought in action items to the board or to the Finance Committee or Pension and Health Benefits Committee in previous months. So that's why the position is listed the way it is.
I could offer one more suggestion, is that the board could give direction on how to engage on this bill with the bill author, and we could take that direction into those conversations as board direction. That would be another suggestion.
Thank you. Mr. Slayton.
Well, given what we've heard from council and what our CEO just said, I think it might be more prudent, and I would be willing to, if both sides will withdraw their motions, and just ask the chair to direct staff to indicate that we have significant concerns with this bill unless it's modified to fit within our fiduciary framework.
So, so the question then goes
and report back to us in July.
It goes to the maker of the original motion, and second, if you're willing to withdraw your original motion.
Well, I'm asking for a deal here. If we get them both withdrawn, then you can direct
So then we would also withdraw the substitute motion. We would just give direction to the team to bring it back in July. That's what I would suggest. If the maker of the motion is willing to, given our council's opinion, that we really can't. I'm still seeing some puzzled faces, so maybe we'll come back to that.
Okay.
We've got some comment. Mr. Costigan.
Thank you. It's just a process question, Madam President. Since Mr. Jacobs has pointed out that the failure to notify this as an action nullifies our ability to take positions on any bills, I would respectfully request that on all future issues related to legislation that they all be noticed as action items, whether the board takes action on one or not, because of the timeliness.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that on board as we'll consider that. Ms. Greenross.
So sort of to follow up on both what Mr. Costigan and Mr. Jones said, on the process, on legislation, is it the process that the board has to ask for certain bills to be brought for a position, or is it that staff just brings us ones to our attention? Because I noticed that on this list of summaries, so not just this issue, where I do think it's fair that we have an actual analysis before the board takes an action on any bill, so I don't have any problem with that. If we have time to analyze a bill, we should have an analysis to take a position. But I note that we're talking about an initiative later on the agenda, but there's a bill that also deals with the dialysis costs that isn't even on this list. And so how do bills get on this list, and do we have to specifically ask, like, why wasn't the Senator Pan bill on here? I mean, it's so relevant to what we do. Like, how is this list determined, or do we have to ask and pay attention to what's going on in the legislature and ask for bills to be analyzed?
So the list is prepared by staff of bills that we're either actively monitoring or bills that we've taken positions on, as Mr. Jones has noted. Sometimes they do not get on that just because of the timing of the agenda items and when the bills are introduced. And so, you know, we're preparing these items well in advance. But certainly if there's a bill that is not on there that the board would like us to monitor, we can add that definitely going forward. Keep in mind that the delegation of state legislation is with this board and not the team. And so we look at legislation and bring it forward for action that we deem is important to, you know, the board in alignment with our pension and investment and health beliefs.
So just knowing a lot about the ledge process, that bills get gutted and amended pretty quickly, you know, got to be pretty nimble on I appreciate you're trying to monitor everything that's happening, but especially in the, as you get toward this phase in the ledge session, things are happening fast and furious, and, bills get gutted and amended into substantive things that we would have strong issues with. So how can the process be addressed to, stay on top of that?
So what I will commit to you is that we will have further discussions. The team will caucus, and I will discuss with them how we can improve the reporting and monitoring and oversight of legislation, so that the board can effectively execute its duties. And
that'd be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I will look forward for the board's opportunity to take a position on this, and I'm clearly opposed to it unless it's amended, not just because of the change in the relationship potentially of our role and the authority of this board, but I'm also concerned about moving that out of the controller's office and putting that with UC as well for a number of reasons. So I'll look forward to discussion with the rest of my colleagues.
Thank you. So I would ask the makers of the original motion and the substitute motion to withdraw your motions at this time, and I will give direction that we will bring this back with full analysis in July, and also that we will review the process by which bills come before this board. Okay? I see nods, so that means, so the makers are in agreement, the motions are withdrawn, and that is the direction. I note, sorry, did you have anything else, Mr. Pacheco, on
not on item 12. Yes.
I had one other question on federal legislation.
Sure.
PEPTA is rearing its head again. Nunez is talking about how to reintroduce that, and just wanted to get an update on where we are on that, what our process is for providing input, and et cetera.
We are closely monitoring that, and Gretchen Ziegler, who is mentioned here today, we're preparing a letter to express any of our concerns, and so we'll share that with the board as soon as we have it ready.
Okay,
but yes, we are on top of that.
Okay, and PEPTA, I should just say, is the Public Employees Pension Transparency Act.
Correct.
So, which we have thought in the past would be could be negative for CalPERS and other public pension funds.
Exactly, and thank you for bringing that up, and we'll make sure to include our progress in the future.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I note that, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I thought that you had asked to speak on 9B, but I note that now that it's 8B, you're also on for the public comment, the last, for 14. Can I just add some extra time for you for that one? Is that all right? Thank you very much for your consideration. Okay, that will bring us, thank you very much, Mr. Pacheco.
Sure, and I think I'm up for the next one.
And you are? Oh, yes, you're up for the next one, Agenda Item 9, legislation. Thank you.
No problem. Agenda Item 9A through C. So these are 3 legislative items that we're bringing before you, 2 bills and a ballot initiative that recently qualified for the November 2018 general election. So as discussed here today, there have been some recent developments since preparing our agenda items. Our agenda items are out of date, and I'd like to provide an update and then also some alternative recommendations around these. So first, 9A is Senate Bill 1124, sponsored by the California Professional Firefighters and authored by Senator Leyva. Among other things, it requires that a pension that would normally be reduced due to disallowed compensation being factored into the calculation, that pension remain unchanged, and that CalPERS continue to pay the pension on a prospective basis. It also requires that any overpayment made to the member, that reimbursement be made by the employer back to CalPERS. The concern that we have here is that it limits our ability to correct errors, and that could impact the IRS guidelines for maintaining our tax qualified status. We've offered some amendments to the sponsor and the author's office as early as last week. We would like an opportunity to work with them before this body takes a position on the bill. So at this time, our recommendation is that the board, not act on the bill, and we'll update you on our progress. So let me just pause there before going on.
So this is another one that we could potentially bring back in July for consideration if we've had successful negotiations with the author of the bill.
Exactly, and we have a meeting with them on Friday
Terrific.
to continue that work.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Costigan.
So I just want to make sure we are now going to have action items on the July agenda. At least 2 items now is what I'm hearing. Okay, do we
Yes.
Potentially.
Yes, we will potentially have, yes, we will certainly have at least one. This one, depending on how the
the
success
PAN
of the
bill.
negotiation, the PAN bill certainly will be.
And potentially this one.
And potentially this one.
Thank you.
That's right. Any further questions on that? Okay. Please continue, Mr. Pacheco.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to agenda item 9B. So similarly, Assembly Bill 1912, sponsored by SEIU and authored by the chair of the Assembly PERS Committee, Freddie Rodriguez. This is the bill around pension obligations related to JPAs, or Joint Powers of Authority. We discussed this last month in the Finance and Administration Committee, and as you may recall, the sponsor and several of our employer associations and employers spoke before you on the legislation. At that time, there was general agreement to provide employers some additional time to explore alternative solutions to hold JPAs liable for retirement obligations. We received amendments last night. Our program area and our legal office is looking at those. So again, with that in mind, we're asking the board not to act on this bill today, and we'll keep you posted on our progress.
Thank you. I see no requests from the board, but we do have several members of the public who wish to speak on this item, so I'll ask them to come forward now. Terry Brennan and Al Darby. If you could take one of these seats to my left. The mics will be turned on for you. Please identify yourself and your affiliation for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes in which to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Al Darby, Vice President, Retired Public Employees Association. It appears that a legislative solution to the East San Gabriel JPA, or also known as LA Works, that would cause the sponsoring cities to pay up has failed. The retroactive provision in the bill has been amended out. At least that's our latest understanding. AB 1912 will solve most future JPA defaults, unless there are those that are in the same condition as the LA Works one. But if they're still under contract, then there's some hope for them, apparently, for the retroactive provision is gone, so apparently that isn't going to work. Since the TAP fund is greatly overfunded, it's alleged to be 280% funded, RPEA urges this board to consider making the LA Works folks specifically whole, or at least better off, using TAP funds. They took a 63% haircut in this experience at the East San Gabriel JPA. So we would certainly urge you to take a look to see if you can somehow reduce the size of that haircut for those folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darby. Mr. Brennan.
Madam President, members, Terry Brennan on behalf of SEIU California. I guess I need to apologize for how late these amendments are, but that's a function of the legislative process and negotiations. I wanted to, and I'm fine with this moving over to next month. It'll probably be weeks from the governor's desk by that point. I want to talk a little bit about CalPERS concerns last time we were here and what's happened, what the amendments do, so you have a sense of at least our perspective. You'll get your analysis from your members. But one of the concerns mentioned is not having a timeline for when well, let me back up for a second. We have stopped the requirement that we've replaced the requirement that you have to assign liability for current JPAs on a regular basis to at the point at which you've noticed you're going to dissolve, end your contract with CalPERS, no longer be responsible for it, that's the point at which the member agencies then have to assign liability. Or, if they can't assign liability, the board has the authority to assign liability. Should the board not reach agreement on that, it goes to joint and several liability. So you have a 3-step process by which you assure there's going to be somebody to go after for these responsibilities. Having said that, one of the first concerns of CalPERS is not a timeline on there. The reason we didn't put a timeline in there is there's a timeline in the other bill you talked about, the PAN bill, not the one you objected to, but a bill that establishes notice requirements and timelines. We didn't want to interfere with that. We're happy to work around that and give something that provides enough notice, but I can tell you right now, the short timelines you have on that bill do not make the agencies feel comfortable that they could come to agreement. And then it requires, prior to reducing the benefits, we changed that. You're no longer required to sue. I think they've asked for some fiduciary language. I presume we can work on that. I mean, that's sort of inherent in everything we do at CalPERS, that we don't interfere with your fiduciary duties. And then thirdly was that our liability only extends to pension obligations. It's a long conversation about your council's interactions with the IRS. We've had both league attorneys and SEIU attorneys look at your communications with the IRS and feel comfortable. But let me rephrase that. My question was, are anything we doing in this bill put CalPERS at risk with the IRS for their tax status? If so, I'm not doing it. All the attorneys we've talked to said there is nothing in the communications with between CalPERS and the IRS or any of their agreements to this point that this would impact to the point of putting it at risk. So I think we've answered most of the questions, but if you need more,
thank you, Mr.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan, for that presentation. I just want to make sure I understand our timeline. At least according to the file, the bill is currently set for hearing on the 26th of June?
25th and 26th.
Okay, and the deadline to get this one out is June 29th?
Correct.
No, I'm agreeing with you because I'm not in, I'd rather go ahead and do something on this rather than put it over because you've got the policy committee hearing it that needs some direction. And so I don't know, Madam President, if there's the ability to give staff direction because the amendments will be analyzed and you've got the committee hearing and since we don't have a position on it, who will be at committee, I assume that's what you're looking for, is something, we're not going to meet again before the bill is heard. And then the next deadline will then be, if my dates are right, is August 17th, which would be the fiscal deadline?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted folks to note that we're bumping up because this is a fiscal bill that's got to be out by the 29th. Thank you, Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Frost, what direction would satisfy that concern?
I appreciate Mr. Brennan's review of the amendments that came into us last evening. And so as long as the board is understanding of those amendments, I think you give us board direction and we continue to engage and work through the final amendments to the bill before it moves to its final steps.
Okay, without taking a formal position?
Yep, you can just do board direction.
Okay, well, that will be the direction then.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brennan. I see no further requests on 9B, so we can move on to 9C.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I move on to 9C, I'll just mention that Senate Bill 783 that we talked about on the divestment process did pass out of the Assembly PERS Committee this morning. So we'll continue to monitor that. Before you is an action item related to a ballot initiative that relates to establishing state regulations on kidney dialysis clinics. Last month at the Pension and Health Benefits Committee, our CalPERS health team members presented an overview of dialysis treatment utilization and cost by members enrolled in CalPERS basic and Medicare plans. And as a reminder, in 2017, CalPERS spent $62 million on dialysis treatment. So if voters approve this ballot initiative, which is titled the Fair Pricing for Dialysis Act, it does a number of things. It limits amounts of dialysis clinics may charge for patient care. It requires dialysis clinics to issue rebates to patients or insurers if they go over the limit. It imposes penalties for excessive charges. It requires annual reporting regarding clinic costs, patient charges, and revenue, and it prohibits dialysis clinics from discriminating against patients based on the source of payment for their care. So while the initiative has the potential to lower costs for receiving dialysis, there is some concern that it could have a negative impact on our members' access to dialysis services. So I believe we have here in the auditorium individuals on both sides of this initiative. We've brought this forward for the board to consider taking a position, given the nature of the initiative and the work that we do in the healthcare program. I'd recommend that we hear from those individuals and then go from there, Madam President.
Okay, sounds good. Ms. Taylor, can we hear public comment? Please, okay, one moment. Ms. Taylor.
So I was concerned that there didn't seem to be a lot of analysis on this, on whether or not for sure. So is it because the initiative isn't plain languaged enough, whether or not it will impact our members negatively, and whether or not it will save us revenue or cost us revenue? It didn't seem like that was in our analysis.
So I know that I'm going to turn to Karen Polish, who's here, who's been working on this issue, that might be able to answer that.
Thank you. You were just sitting there, so I thought I'd ask.
Good morning, Ms. Polish.
Karen Polish, CalPERS team member. The ballot initiative indicates some information that's not terribly clear for CalPERS programs. So the rebates are not for federally funded or state, local, city, or county funded or paid programs. So we're not sure that our programs would be eligible under the HMO side of the house. Because we contract with commercial health plans, if we are considered to be eligible for the rebate would go to the plan. Right. And then the act does not require them to pass that through. So it's unclear if we would actually see any savings there. Right. And on the PPO side, the state payer piece kicks in because we are the direct payer, so we probably would not be eligible for the rebates. So we're not entirely sure.
I'm sorry, even though it's provided as a private insurance, it's not a Medi-Cal or ACA plan.
The regulation will tell.
It's not really clear.
The way that it's stated in the act, it says that state payer is not eligible. The LAO has indicated in their analysis that in the CalPERS HMO side of the house, we are not considered the payer. The plan is considered the payer. The regulation that public health would do would clarify all of that. So it's not terribly clear at this point. On the PPO side, it's much clearer because we are the direct payer and we are a state payer, so we would most likely not be eligible for rebates there.
Okay, and then do we know how many of our members, because as I understand it, once they've been on dialysis for, I forget, 2 years, then we move them off, or 1 year, we move them into Medicare. So then it mitigates some of that.
Right. So if you're in the end-stage renal disease, the first 3 months is a waiting period where CalPERS is the insurer. Then there's a 30-month coordination period where CalPERS is the primary payer and Medicare is the secondary payer. And after the 33-month period combined, Medicare is the primary payer. So regardless of age, people move into the Medicare eventually, but we do have a portion of time where we're the primary payer.
And do we have any idea what population that is?
Yeah, excuse me. Ms. Bailey-Crimmins provided some information last month about the numbers, and I believe that we have about 1,500 or so members receiving dialysis, and almost 1,000 of them were Medicare, with about 550 enrolled in basic.
Okay. All right. Those are some of the questions I needed for clarification. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We do have several members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Please would Mr. Miller, David Miller, and Mr. Brennan come forward. You could take these two seats to my left. Identify yourself and your affiliation for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes with which to speak. And then following them will be Tom Hiltock and Christy Foy.
Thank you for this, Madam President and board members. So just going directly to the issue that was just raised, I think both sides of the ballot measure agree that this will save hundreds of millions of dollars in costs, that the LAO has suggested this will save millions of dollars for state and local payers. The rebates are only one part of this. The caps that are put into place will actually reduce healthcare costs across the entire industry. And if dialysis providers exceed that cap, there'll be a 10% penalty that hits across the board. So we think that your plans in general will benefit from the cap that is going to be placed on top of the entire industry. We think 68% of your business is absolutely covered. It's our intent that the other 32% is covered. I'd also note that the rebates do not go back to the provider. So if the provider is attempted to not give CalPERS the rebate, we think that that doesn't go into their profits. So we don't think they have a financial incentive to anger one of the most sophisticated purchasers in the healthcare market by deferring the rebates into somebody else's pot. So we think that that's an unlikely solution. And then the rebates and fines are sort of the last defense if somebody continues to gouge after the ballot measure is passed. So I just wanted to take that on. And then on this question of access, in that the prices might be set too low, that we might be too effective in cost savings. I would just like to say that we actually thought about this when we developed the measure, and that there's a number of safeguards for CalPERS measures, as well as all dialysis members in the ballot. So it allows the department to adjust the cost categories. So we think when we cost this out currently, we think we got it right. But also the department can adjust the cost categories in the ballot measure so that there's another safety valve in it. It allows a court review for individual clinics to review their financial situation. So if we got it wrong and the Department of Health got it wrong, there's a court review that's in there. And then also the legislature can amend the act to further accomplish the goals. Our goals is to save money and not reduce access. So we think that we have that covered. There's at least 3 sets of protections. And then also, just as a side note, people have raised this question about whether physicians and nursing services are covered by the act, and they're 100% covered. Any physician activity under his scope or her scope of practice, and a nurse, his or her scope of practice is completely reimbursed. So nursing physician services are reimbursed by the act as well. So I just wanted to address those 2 points.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. When you were talking earlier about providers having to, providers passing through the rebates, you meant insurance carriers.
Yes. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Terry Brennan, on behalf of SEIU California. We worked with staff on this quite a bit prior to this, and I think the last agenda item probably in more staff detail than this one. Excuse me. That I think there's agreement that it saves tens of millions of dollars to CalPERS. Part of the reason it's not more is you have a relatively small population that is in this. However, it is one of the fastest growing populations in the healthcare world. It may not be a huge thing today. It's going to be a huge thing for you down the road with your aging population. Having said that, this is like one of the most predatory business practices in the entire healthcare industry. If you can't take these guys on and tell them no, how are you going to take on the monopolistic, provider industry, the medical groups, and the folks we're fighting about to get health care for our members in much more subtle ways than this, which is clearly just the most egregious business practice in healthcare we have right now. So I'm hoping this is the one action item you actually take action on today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Next, if Mr. Hiltock and Ms. Foy could come forward, please. Please take one of these two seats to my left. Identify yourself and your affiliation for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes, rather, in which to speak.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Christy Foy, here representing the California Dialysis Council, and our members proudly provide care to 66,000 Californians who depend on dialysis to stay alive, including the 1,500 CalPERS members that were mentioned. I'm also here representing the official ballot committee that is opposed to this ballot measure. More than 75 organizations are also opposed to this measure, including the California Medical Association, the California chapter of American College of Emergency Physicians, the American Nurses Association of California, and many other health leaders. This measure is dangerous for patients and it's costly for CalPERS. For starters, CalPERS is exempt from the initiative's rebate and price cap provisions. I know there was a discussion about that earlier, but the initiative text specifically states, and I quote, Medicare or other federal, state, county, city, or local government payers. So there is no question really that CalPERS is a government payer. We believe it's pretty cut and dry that as a government payer, CalPERS is excluded from any of the rebates. Further, there is no requirement in the initiative that the private health plans pass any of the savings along to CalPERS, which was also mentioned earlier. So while CalPERS would not benefit at all from the initiative's price cap provisions, CalPERS would be on the hook for the higher costs your members who are currently on dialysis. Simply put, this initiative would make the business of operating outpatient dialysis clinics in California economically unviable. It will force the clinics to reduce operations or even close. Our industry hired former legislative analyst Bill Ham and his team of economic consultants at the Berkeley Research Group to conduct an independent analysis. What they found was that if this initiative were to pass, 83% of clinics would have a negative operating margins. If even some of these clinics were forced to close or reduce operations, it would be a public health crisis. Dialysis patients would lose access to care and would be forced to dialyze in the hospital or be pushed into emergency rooms due to complications from missing treatment. Dialysis patients are very ill, and missing even one treatment can lead to serious complications and even death. As the CalPERS staff analysis points out, this will raise costs for CalPERS. But most concerning is it would be dangerous for patients who need this treatment 3 days a week, 4 hours at a time to survive. This measure is costly and dangerous, and for those reasons, we urge CalPERS to oppose. I also have Tom Hiltock here with me to answer any technical questions, and we want to thank you for your attention to this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Foy. Mr. Hiltock.
I thought maybe I'd just talk about the legislative analyst, because there's been a lot of discussion about what the legislative analyst has said or concluded, and I would start by saying the legislative analyst hasn't concluded anything yet. The legislative analyst has been engaged in a process of analyzing this initiative since last fall, and that work is not yet complete. In fact, none of us will see what the legislative analyst actually says about this initiative until it releases its final report at the end of July. But what we do know is what the legislative analyst told the legislature in May of this year, just a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago. And what it said there was, at that point in time, it had concluded that it was completely and totally unclear as to whether the initiative even applies to CalPERS, that you're a government payer, and that as a government payer, the initiative does not apply and no rebates would be awarded. More importantly, what the legislative analyst told the legislature is that the initiative causes a number of potential reactions by the industry, some of which, if taken, and more likely, we would argue, would result in higher costs to health insurers, and that would include CalPERS when you contract with health insurers. And that is because you're changing the dynamic of the marketplace where people obtain dialysis treatment. And if access is reduced or access is denied to outpatient services, those patients have no place to go other than a hospital, and in most cases, an emergency room. And as I'm sure you're all well aware, that's the most expensive place that you can obtain healthcare that can be delivered in an outpatient setting. And so in that regard, no one's claims about what legislative analyst has concluded are accurate. The legislative analyst is still doing that work. And I would certainly urge you to do nothing until the legislative analyst has concluded that work at the end of July. But nonetheless, we believe, based on the economics of this initiative and what it does to dialysis clinics, that you are ready, willing, and able to oppose the measure today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question for either one of you. So we have a problem, and some may define it as predatory pricing. Some may define it as too much market control concentrated in two companies. And so the market dynamics of that are that when you just look at the pricing differential and the inability for others to enter the market, you got a problem. I don't like initiatives. I think the initiative process is fraught with problems, starting with you can't change it other than through another initiative. I mean, it's just such a blunt instrument to try to do public policy. On the other hand, what are your organizations, if this does not pass or doesn't go forward, what's the solution? What are you and the companies you represent going to do to fix this problem?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And when you talk about the market, there's several regulatory issues that have been a problem with locating a dialysis clinic in California. Every single dialysis clinic has to be licensed by the state of California, and because, as was mentioned before, the majority of patients are actually being reimbursed through the Medicare system that they transition into after that 33-month period. They also have to be regulated by CMS for their Medicare reimbursement. And so both of those things have to take place. So when you want to open a new clinic in California, unfortunately, there's a very long waiting time in order to get that initial licensure by the state. And then after that, you have to apply for regulation by CMS. And there's about a 12-month waiting period that you have to wait to get that certification by CMS. So you have to come into California, build a clinic, put all of the equipment, hire all of your staff, and pay for everyone, and then wait a minimum of 12 months until you can actually start treating a patient. So because of that, it takes a bigger company in order to set something up. So what we're doing is we're working with both the state of California and with the federal government in order to make that window of time that you have to wait become a lot shorter. And so we have made progress. Just 2 months ago, CMS now has a new system in place where you can get certification through an accrediting organization. And so the hope is to make that waiting time go down from 12 months to 3 months. And we really do think that that will open up the market in California so that we'll start to see a lot more companies coming in and opening up dialysis clinics in California. And that's something that we've worked on.
I appreciate what you're saying, but that's not going to change the dynamics. That's only one of the problems. Mm-hmm. The market concentration and the cost of the equipment and the ability to have clinics all over the state, the barriers to entry are not just regulatory. They are market forces. So I understand for-profit companies, and you have your shareholders and you're trying to maximize return to shareholders. But what you're doing is putting an unbelievable burden on people in California. So that answer is not sufficient in my book just to pass it off as a regulatory problem. It's a market concentration problem of the size of the two companies that have 70% of the business in California. And I don't, at some point in time, you got to get the prices down.
Well, and I do think that by addressing some of those issues, you asked what we're working towards, we will be able to open up the market so that more, for example, we do have several nonprofit dialysis providers that are members of our organization. And so hopefully this will allow them to expand and to be able to be bigger players in the market.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Slayton. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yeah, Mr. Hilcock.
Yes.
Yeah, question is for you. You made reference to the LAO's position, and you said that they haven't done anything. But however, they did release a letter to the State Attorney General back in 2017, And while he, in any type of analysis, trying to predict, you're uncertain as to exact numbers. However, the LAO goes on to say that CalPERS spent about $70 million for this purpose, and he goes further to say that there should be substantial savings. So how do you reconcile that with what you allege that the LAO hasn't done anything?
So when the LAO did that analysis, they made the first assumption, which was an error, that the initiative applies to CalPERS. So when asked that question to the legislature 1 month ago, this is what the LAO said, quote, "It is unclear whether private insurers that contract with government agencies or programs, such as a private health insurers that contract with CalPERS or Medi-Cal, would be eligible for rebates under the measure." So when the LAO wrote that back in the fall, that was when the initiative process immediately commenced. And so the legislative analyst is given about 30 days to analyze what is a very complicated measure by anyone's analysis. And so it's not surprising to me that the LAO back in the fall would write an analysis that didn't really come to any sort of legal conclusion, but just said, you know, if this, then that, if this, then that, you know, and provide a bunch of different examples. By the time we got to May and the presentation to the legislature, the LAO was much less clear about whether the initiative would even apply to CalPERS. And more importantly, by that time, the legislative analyst had considered what the initiative might do to the marketplace and what it might do to health plans contracting with dialysis providers, and concluded that because of the dramatic financial effect on clinics, that it is as likely as anything that costs will go up. The other thing I point out to you is that the union that's sponsoring this initiative does not argue that this initiative's purpose is to limit prices at all. In fact, their stated purpose is to increase the cost of health care. What they would like the dialysis clinics to do is spend more money on allowable services, direct patient care costs. And I see one of the commissioners wrinkling her nose at me. There are many public statements where the union has said just that the objective here is
I'm sorry, I can't
clinics.
allow you to continue to testify because you've asked, the question's been asked and you've answered.
And just one final question. What is the date of this latest LAOs?
It's May 15th, 2018. I believe it was a copy in your staff report.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Taylor.
So I just wanted to ask sort of what Henry was asking, because we do have an analysis here, but also I will say that it appears to me, based on our analysis, that there's a cap that this initiative is asking for, based on information, just public information of the two companies that control the majority of the market. We understand that prices are out of control. There's been no effort for these companies to make any concession to pricing for when in negotiations with insurers or anything, as well as you have a staffing issue. So I think that for you to give an analysis of what, first of all, we do have access to the LAO. Okay, we are another state agency. So that may be a quote, but we also have access, if this passes, we have access to the departments that would enforce this, which can also interpret the law. So I think for, my question is, what would you do to control these costs and protect our patients with staffing if this weren't able to pass?
I think that's a good question. And I think one of the problems is that in the initiative itself, it mentions the allowable costs. And the difficulty in is how that's defined. And there are many costs that go with a dialysis clinic that are not a part of that allowable cost, such as the medical directors, the nurse manager, and the facility administrator. And those are all required by CMS, in addition to HR, legal, compliance, taxes, insurance. So that's part of the problem with the way the initiative is drafted, is that the actual costs to run a dialysis clinic are not a part of that calculation. And so I think that's something that really needs to be looked at when you're discussing the initiative itself and how it will truly impact. Because
that's not the question I'm asking you.
Oh, I know, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to that. But the issue is how you look at those different costs. And that's something that, of course, I think everyone in healthcare is looking at how to control costs, but still providing access and quality care. And the key with the dialysis clinics in California is that we consistently have more 4- and 5-star ratings from CMS, from the federal government, than any other state. So I think the services that we're providing in California are excellent and above and beyond anything that's being provided in any other state, in addition to our access. I mean, that is something
I'm sorry, you're not answering the question. You're just giving a long preamble. I have to get you to the point, please.
No problem. I apologize.
Thank you.
And so again, these are all just part of the cost issues that we would address if this does not pass.
So ultimately, you're saying you don't have a way to control costs. Is that what you're telling me?
No, the way to control costs is to look at all these items such as, you know, HR, legal, compliance, taxes, insurance, all the other things that go about and
What's your profit margin?
Cost. I represent the entire dialysis council, so I don't know individual company profit margins.
That's fine. What's the general profit margin?
I don't know. I don't even know the general profit margin for individual companies because it's different. Like I said, we have nonprofit members of our association, so of course that's going to be different than for-profit members.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Costigan.
Thank you, Madam President. I mean, given this debate, the discussion about the LAO, and that actually this is not an urgent matter, it's on the November ballot, I'd at least, just as we did with the 2 other pieces of legislation, put it over, because here are the concerns that I have that I'd like staff to address on the next one. If you look through the support and opposition, what I don't see is any local government. So LAO makes the indication this saves tens of millions of dollars, potentially. Could save up to tens of millions of dollars on the initiatives. Yet, at least in the materials in front of me, I see no local government support or opposition, so people that are directly impacted. In our own analysis, we're not sure whether it applies to us or not, and the indications are it doesn't apply to us. And then when you look at the opposition, again, I'm not a health expert on either side, but when you have the California Medical Association, the American Nurses Association of California, the Renal Physicians Association, sort of going through, I would like more information to come back to us. I mean, again, this is a November issue, similar to the 2 pieces of legislation that I actually think were more timely than this, like July or August, would still leave the proponents or the opponents plenty of time to deal with this in November. So I don't know if you need a motion for that or committee direction.
This is an action item. It's fine for you to make a motion if you'd like.
But if there's no motion, then there's no action. But I'm all right, I'll make a motion that we take no position at this time and direct staff to come back with additional information related to the fiscal cost.
Okay. Motion made by Costigan and seconded by Hollinger. On the motion, Mr. Rubalcava.
Yes, I would speak against the motion. I think staff brought this to us for a reason. As CalPERS, we are a big purchaser of health care, and we deal with insurance companies. The insurance companies they have to report the loss ratio. I was disappointed that the association was able to speak to the profit margin. We do have an interest in having quality of care. The debate has been talked about whether we get a rebate or not and how local government is impacted, but we do represent our constituents, which are patients. They're looking forward to a pension. They're looking forward to quality health care through our contracted health insurance carriers. So I think taking a position is a reasonable thing. And if the initiative is trying to set some sort of ensure that the quality is there, I don't think, I mean, it's been framed as somehow it's going to I like the market concentration term my colleague here said. If the market is going to respond by saying, I see it like a scare tactic, you know, that, oh, we're going to limit access. But, you know, I know that sometimes as CalPERS, we're seeing what is an appropriate, as part of our ESG, what is an appropriate goal? Is it exorbitant profits or is it excess? So I would say we should take a position in support of the initiative.
Is that a motion? Is that a substitute motion?
That is a substitute motion, yes.
I'll second.
Motion made by Rubalcava, substitute motion made by Rubalcava, seconded by Mr. Miller on the motion that's before us. Ms. Greenross.
So I haven't heard anybody mention there's a levy bill, SB 1156, that also deals with some issues with dialysis. And we don't have it on our ledge thing, so I don't know if this relates to this initiative or not. I wonder if anybody could speak to that. But I would support Mr. Costigan's motion to have additional information brought back to us so that we could have a more informed decision, because I just felt like the CalPERS staff analysis wasn't really clear, and maybe we could include information about Levia's bill to see if it relates or not. I mean, we're all for, keeping costs down, but I don't think we have enough information about the impact to CalPERS.
Does the team have any information on 1156 at this time that they can share, and how it might relate to this initiative?
Not at this time, Madam President, but we could certainly bring that back as part of the additional information that Mr. Costigan's asking for.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Miller, on the motion.
Yeah, just, I've spent most of my adult life as a regulator, so, I cannot even count the number of times when I've heard industry folks come in on so many topics and say, oh, this will be a disaster if you regulate us this way. This will put us all out of business. It will drive this will just be terrible. And most of the time, in my experience, that has been quite an exaggeration in reality, and that the market addresses whatever constraints, internal, external, that are at play. And if those constraints move the market in a good direction, they become normalized. And so I really take some issue with that idea that this increased regulation would drive this industry to the brink, and think that there's a real problem that this industry needs to address, regardless of what happens with this piece of legislation or this initiative. And hopefully the industry will have much more compelling responses on those issues of the problems that that we're experiencing with this industry.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Costigan.
I just wanted to be clear. The motion, because it's you made the motion is take a position, but your motion actually is to take a support position.
Support position.
I wanted to make sure.
He said to make a motion, to take a position in support of the initiative.
Okay, I didn't hear that. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Sure. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, I think if we take a support position, we can still get our information back to us. I think that's a no-brainer. Our staff can do some more analysis, compare it to the piece of legislation that Ms. Green-Ross was talking about. But secondarily, I think it's important that we remember, I don't know about anybody else, but anytime I watch TV, I see the anti-commercials on this. So all I can think about is how much money you guys have spent on that already, and how much that could go into lowering the costs of care. So I'm in support of the substitute motion of an approval on this, or a support on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further requests to speak from the board. The motion before you is to adopt a support position on the initiative. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Jones.
Yeah, just one clarification. We're adopting a support provided that the additional information.
The motion was to adopt a support position on the initiative.
Okay, but as Ms. Taylor said, that we can get the information.
I'm happy to still direct the team to bring us back
Okay.
additional information. Okay. Motion is before you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, I think we need to take a roll call vote. Is it easier to do it we may as well do it by the system. Please record your vote. The motion passes. The final vote was six yes, 3 abstentions, and 4 noes. So the only investment committee would that be? It can pass. Could you please clarify? But I think only an investment committee is required to be a vote of 7.
That's correct, Your
pass.
Mother.
Yes.
President Mother.
So it says not pass, but it actually does pass.
It passes.
There's 13. But 3 abstained.
So that is considered
of voters.
So, okay, that brings us now to agenda item number. Sorry, you have nothing else on 9, correct? Okay.
No, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to agenda item number 10, proposed decisions of administrative law judges, and I'll call on the Vice President, Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the board adopts the proposed decisions at agenda items 10A through 10M as the board's own decisions with a minor modifications argued by staff and a minor modification to correct the citation to section 2120 on page 6 of the proposed decision at agenda item 10A.
On motion, is there a second to the motion? Second. Seconded by Mr. Gillihan. Any items that any board member wishes to take up separately? I see none. So on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. On agenda item number 11, petitions for reconsideration, I'll again call on Mr. Fechner.
Thank you. I move that the board deny the petitions for reconsiderations at agenda items 11A and 11B.
Seconded by Ms. Taylor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We've already taken up agenda item number 12, so that brings us to agenda item number 13, summary of board direction.
Okay, I recorded 4. So the first would be to bring back analysis on Senate Bill 783, authored by Senator Pan, to the July offsite, and to put that as a part of the agenda. I want to give a little more background just so you understand the intent of this bill. We did meet with Senator Pan on a couple of occasions, and in the bill itself, just so you understand what they're trying to accomplish, in Section 1B, it actually says and acknowledges that the boards retain exclusive and plenary authority over the decision, the final decision. And in conversations with Senator Pan, this is a way for the legislature to get more information before they pass bills out of their respective Assembly and Senate. Okay, and then 2 is to review the process by which bills come before the board. And what we try to balance is we engage early. We did receive a lot of feedback from legislative staff that we needed to engage earlier if there was a problem with the way that the bill was written, or that we had problems with administering the bill as it was written. So we weigh in very early as these bills are emerging, but we also want to be very careful that we only bring you the bill once it's set for policy so that you can make a policy decision and that you're not weighing in too early before the bill even gets a hearing. Number 3 is as far as the JPA bill 1912, board direction is to support the amendments that were articulated by Terry Brennan during his public comment, and to articulate that through further discussions with the bill sponsor and the bill author. And if I might add, we could also update your legislative report to reflect this direction on both of those bills so that you have it. And then finally on item 9C, that we bring back additional analysis on the impacts to CalPERS, but we also engage with local government to see if we can get their analysis and what we might be able to find on why the medical industry is opposing the ballot initiative as well, but to bring that analysis back in July.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just a thought, and I don't know, I know you've directed staff to bring back a response to Mr. Costigan's concern about having bills that we could take action on. And just a thought that, you know, like in our regular agenda, we have consent items. Yeah. And so all these bills could be under consent, and then a member wants to pull out, then they would be able to just pull out that bill rather than having action. That's just a thought, you know.
I think the question is whether, how do you convert them to an action item? We can't just convert any bill to an action item
but if
it's an information item. So if we put it on a consent information.
No, I meant consent.
an action.
In other words, the consent would be whatever staff is doing, and then any board member could pull one out.
Okay, we'll consider. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll consider various strategies.
And then General Counsel wanted me to validate that the board direction on 1912 was, as I indicated, that it would be to support the amendments articulated by Mr. Brennan during his public comment as we engage in further discussions with the bill author and sponsor. Was that, did I record that direction appropriately?
So it wasn't, so I think it was to continue to engage in discussions to advance CalPERS position.
Okay.
Just because you hadn't had a chance to analyze the amendments, and
correct.
While we certainly, have good faith with Mr. Brennan, we want to make sure that we do our own analysis.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Jacobs. That brings us to agenda item 14, and I have Neil Johnson. Neil, I thank you for your consideration earlier. I will allot you 5 minutes, and if you could identify yourself and your affiliation for the record.
Neil Johnson, SEIU Local 1000. All I could say, the one that Priya about every 4 or 5 months somehow misses my request for a comment. But thank you for your consideration. One of the things I wanted to do was to thank Mr. McCollum, who's departing the system, for his excellent service during his time. While he frustrated some of my colleagues who were of the actuaries here, because he was the one person in the unit that refused to actually become a full member of SEIU. But Gary did good work, and I congratulate him for I thank him for his work and congratulate him on his retirement. The other issue, which is what I put in the initial request for, yesterday you adopted the state contribution for annuitants. Traditionally, you've done the 190 formula. This time, you expanded that. Give you a little history. In 2003, we negotiated with Mr. Gillihan's predecessor, Mr. Morgenstern, a 80/80 formula, which is now codified as Government Code Section 22-871.9. It was 0.3, but got moved to 0.9 a couple of years ago because of MOU ratifications in 2016 and 17 that provided provisions that annuitants would be paid on an 80/80 formula basis. Both the old section and the new sections use the term largest state civil service enrollment. So yesterday I figured, after the meeting, went and entered into the computer the various premiums, and I'm maybe backing up. Every year I get from CalHR enrollment data for state and active civil servants to be able to figure out the 80/80 formula and then get confirmation later on that my numbers are in fact correct. So on May 2nd this year, I'd gotten the enrollment data from CalHR that was actually originally compiled by the Controller's Office. And yesterday I was surprised when I ran through the analysis and got different numbers, because I thought I should have the same numbers. While in this case the numbers are slightly higher than that which I would have expected, and I'm not sure that it's a small victory for the civil service employees, because I'm not sure CalHR is not going to have a different set of numbers than PERS has when they do the calculation. But it really troubles me that we apparently have two different enrollment data sets. leading to different results. And I don't know quite where to start in trying to resolve that issue, but that's the problem.
Thank you for raising that. We'll make sure that our teams get together and compare the data sets and see if there's a if there's a problem mismatch and where the problem is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak at this time? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We do not have a closed session of the board today.